Hi, I'm Christy Burcham with Embroidery Online. You know, you always have those last-minute holiday gifts you have to put together. Something for a teacher, or you need to go to a party and you've got to take a present with you. And you don't have time to plan it out and sew your projects ahead of time. We've got a great collection that's going to solve that problem. It's called Mark My Words 4, and it's a collection of felt bookmarks. In this collection, you are going to have your full color instructions included in the pack PDF when you print it out. But I'm going to show you the steps right here. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to hoop 2 layers of a stabilizer. You can choose what kind of stabilizer you want. You can use a tearaway or a cutaway stabilizer, but either way, we recommend that you use 2 layers of it. You're going to hoop that, and then you're going to put that hoop onto the embroidery machine, and you're going to stitch the first stitch of the embroidery design. That stitch is going to be called the placement stitch, and you're stitching that onto the stabilizer only. There's no fabric at this point. This is going to be where you're going to place your felt. After you've stitched that stitch, you're going to remove the hoop from the embroidery machine, and now you're going to put the felt onto it. You're going to cut a piece of felt that's a little bit bigger than your placement stitch, and then you're going to spray the back of that with a temporary adhesive spray, like a 505 temporary adhesive spray. And once you've sprayed that just on one side of your felt, you are going to then place it over that placement stitch. You want to make sure that you're completely covering that placement stitch. You don't want to see that placement stitch outside that felt anywhere. And you also want to make sure that you just secure it down to the stabilizer so it's nice and smooth when you stitch it. At this point, we can put this back onto the embroidery machine and stitch the rest of the design. Now I've got one I've already taken to that point where we have placed it back onto the embroidery machine, and we have stitched the design, everything except for the very last stitch. We do not want to stitch the seam stitch yet. So we've stitched all of the decorative parts of the felt bookmark except for that placement stitch, that last seam stitch. What we're going to do is we're actually going to put another piece of felt onto the back of the hoop and cover this up so that we can then have a finished bookmark when we're done. So what we'll do is take another piece of felt. It can be the same size, or it can be the same color, or it can be a different color, and you're actually going to place that over the embroidery. Again, we've sprayed this with a temporary adhesive spray. We want to make sure that that fully covers the embroidery on the back of the hoop. We don't want to see any of that placement stitch outside the edge of this felt, so make sure it's completely covered. And now we're ready to put this back onto the machine and stitch the very last stitch, which is the seam stitch. I've got one here that I've completed, and you can see that we've stitched the seam stitch around the outside, and it actually stitches through both layers, through the back layer of felt and through the top layer. This particular one also has an eyelet buttonhole that has been stitched through both layers. Now on the back of mine, I have traced it so you can see that it's going to stitch through both layers. You may choose to use a different bobbin thread when you do the very last seam stitch. Normally with bobbin thread, we use a white bobbin thread for the embroidery, but in this case, when you do the actual seam stitch, you may want to change that to a thread that matches your top thread so that your seam on the back will look as good on the back as it does on the front. Now that we've completed this design, we can finish this up. We're going to take this out of the hoop. And we're ready to tear away the stabilizer. Now if you used a cutaway, you'll have to do this step by cutting. We're going to tear this away, and we're actually tearing it away in between the layers of felt. So that tearaway will tear up right to that seam stitch line we created. So you can see now we've got that tearaway torn away almost to the very edge. If you've done a cutaway, it's a little bit trickier because you have to come in with scissors and do this step. But now we've got this almost ready. The next thing we're going to do is to cut the eyelet out of the middle of this eyelet. We're going to use a buttonhole cutter set, And you can get these at a local sewing center. It's got the cutting piece that you need, and then it's going to have the regular buttonhole cutter and an eyelet buttonhole cutter. We don't need the regular one. We're going to use this eyelet buttonhole cutter. Make sure you've got your cutting surface down on the table, and then a rubber mallet. We just put that eyelet cutter where we want it, and one quick cut, and you've got a hole that you need. Now you can also use a hole punch if your hole punch is sharp enough to cut that hole, but you might want to check it first. So if you've got a piece of scrap felt, you can check to make sure your hole will cut. The very last thing, well, the next to the last thing, is to cut away with a pair of pinking shears the edge of this design. So that felt, of course, is not going to ravel, but that pinking gives it a nice finished edge. So you can see how that's going to look by pinking that all the way around. And then you can put some ribbons into this hole. We take a few lengths of ribbon. This is 1/8 inch ribbon, and I've cut them to about 24 inches long. You're going to fold those in half to make a loop. You'll put that loop through that little hole that you just cut. And then you take those and tuck the tails into that loop. When you pull it, your bookmark is ready to go. Thanks for visiting us at Embroidery Online, and we hope you enjoy these quick and easy felt bookmarks.